Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the BlackBerry KeyOne and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, I will probably be the first one to tell you if you can go and swing for any other Android phone that's been released probably in the last 3 to 4 years, I would probably recommend buying that phone over this one. But this was still a very interesting concept from BlackBerry, once, very popular phone manufacturer. And I guess this is another way of them trying to go ahead and keep their older design, kind of refresh it into a more modern approach. I wouldn't say it didn't work out that well. I think a lot of people were interested in this phone, but again, hardware is just one thing. Software is a completely other beast, and if you don't support your phones for too long, the phone kind of fizzles out and nobody really cares anymore. Even if the release is very, full of hype, if the phone's not that good or if people don't like it, usually the line is not going to last that long. So if you want to pick up some phones, I would recommend this year. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the BlackBerry KeyOne, we can see that this is a very interesting phone. So on the front, we have a 4.5-inch IPS LCD panel. Now, that already right there is kind of a huge move away from most of the panels that we have nowadays. We have OLED displays, we have very high resolution displays as well. This is 1080p, but a big massive thing to keep in mind is that this is a IPS panel. It's not an OLED panel and it's still at 60 Hz. It's not at 120 Hz either. So those types of things that make this phone feel that much older. Again, it already kind of looks like a little bit of a different phone, so maybe it won't distract too many people, but that is definitely one massive thing to keep in mind. On top of that, you also had the capacitive keys embedded within the bottom portion of the display. So that was another thing that just didn't really make too much sense. And then you had the keyboard keys. So this was either a make it or break it for you. I can't imagine using physical keys like this anymore. And the main reason for this is because they are just so small and my, hands, they're not that big, but they're just kind of thick. So sometimes when I'm clicking buttons, they just, don't work out that well. And whenever I used phones that have a hardware keyboard like this one, or the BlackBerry Priv, or the BlackBerry Classic, they just don't work out that well at all. Even when I type on a little tiny keyboard for Xboxes or something, they don't work out that well either. So I don't know if some people like it or not. I personally never like these types of keyboards, but some people do, and I think that's totally fine. You have a fingerprint sensor in the keyboard as well. You have the charging port on this device. You also have expandable storage on this phone, was actually pretty nice. In 2017, there weren't a ton of phone manufacturers that were still giving you, SD card slots. So again, this was the same year that the iPhone X came out. And I do think, if it was between this or a Galaxy S8, I'm 100% picking up the Galaxy S8. But I think this is still an interesting concept. Now on the back, you had this kind of plastic back a little bit. It kind of had an interesting texture, but I just didn't really like how this phone was as expensive as it was and they were still giving you a plastic back. I feel like a lot of other phone manufacturers, even LG, I think at a time, was giving you a removable back or removable side. I know the G5 allowed you to kind of take the phone apart, but there were some phones that gave you a very good feeling back. And, you could still remove it and, take out the battery if you wanted to. In this case, that was not the case at all. You had the single camera setup on the top left, and that was pretty much it. There wasn't really too much else going on for this phone. It was a very interesting concept, but you can kind of see that it didn't really hold up too well in my opinion because BlackBerry kind of went out of business since then. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up there. Now in terms of the camera quality, this phone has that single 12 megapixel camera on the back. Also has an 8 megapixel camera on the front. Now you can do 4K at 30 on the back, which I think is awesome, and you can do 1080p at 30 on the front. Now back in 2017, most phones were already doing 4K at 60 on the back, but most phones are already doing 1080p on the front, so it's kind of understandable. So how this phone holds up now is completely different than how this phone held up then. There were still lots of phones that were coming out with single camera setups. The Galaxy S8 and the S8 Plus both had single camera setups. The iPhone 8 had a single camera setup, and whatever the OnePlus phone was at that time, maybe had a dual camera setup or something. But with a phone like this, you weren't really out of the times by a completely crazy amount. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. But when you compare this camera nowadays to what we have now, it's a completely different story. Nowadays we have multiple camera sensors. We have 8K capability. The front camera of a Galaxy, a budget Galaxy phone, is probably better than the back camera of this thing. Although the back camera isn't horrible on this phone, you're definitely getting a decent camera on this thing for that time. It's just not really that good anymore, and that's just kind of how it goes. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there as well. Now in the software and longevity portion, this is where, like I said before, it's either a make it or break it for a phone. if you can release a phone and it has all the hype, but you don't support that phone for that long, or it has hardware issues, or it's boring, typically people won't keep that phone around, and that phone line won't stay up that much longer. We've seen this so many times. People think it's so easy to make a phone, and BlackBerry has so much experience. I mean, they made so many successful devices. And with this one, I mean, it got one or two versions of Android, and that was it. So with a phone like the BlackBerry KeyOne, it's just at this weird phase where it's not worth buying, even because it's like support on Android 8.1 or something. It's a very old version of software, and even the Galaxy S8 on One UI 1 on Android 9 is a way better experience than what you're going to be getting here. So from that perspective, I mean, that kind of covers it up there as well. Now on the performance side, this phone internally had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 625 chipset with 3 gigabytes of RAM on the base model, but it did go up to 4 gigs of RAM. Now, the thing I will tell you about the performance of this phone is that it is clearly not the best performing phone. Even in 2020, 2017 when this phone came out, this really wasn't even that great of a performing phone at that time, which is actually pretty insane. You would expect a phone like this to be pretty decent, but that was not the case here at all. You were definitely getting not that great of a device here, so just keep that in mind for one. But also, when compared to other 2017 devices, this phone isn't really doing that great of a job there either. So I think from my perspective, that in and of itself is a very important thing to keep in mind. Now, can you still use this thing? Probably. I think this thing will probably give you like a decent performing experience out of it. It's not going to be that slow. I mean, it's not going to be that slow for how old it is. But again, when you compare it against phones that have came out recently, again, this phone is not going to be holding up that well. But if you compare it against a Galaxy S8 or something, like I guess you'll kind of see similar type of performance. But the Galaxy S8 even was faster than this phone. So it's kind of another big, massive thing to keep in mind there as well. So in the performance side, I mean, I wouldn't really pick up this phone anymore either. The battery life, it had a 3500 mAh battery, which is actually pretty big. Having a bigger size battery like this is also pretty nice. And this phone actually did end up having it. So I think that's kind of another thing to kind of keep in mind with this specific device. So to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is, I think the BlackBerry KeyOne, it just really isn't worth buying anymore, really in any single way. I think it's a cool concept, and I think BlackBerry did a very interesting job with it. But I do think for the everyday person, buying a phone like this, it doesn't really make any sense at all. You're much better off buying a phone like a Galaxy S10. That's even kind of unsupported with software, but a Galaxy S10, an iPhone 10, a Galaxy S20 if you can, an iPhone 11. Like those types of phones are going to be way better than this one. A Google Pixel 4, a Google Pixel 5. Those devices will be much better and giving you a much better experience than what you're going to be getting on a BlackBerry KeyOne. I think the KeyOne was a cool concept. They eventually made the Key 2, but I just don't think this phone is really worth buying in any capacity anymore. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.